Hello there.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's discussion in legacy learning on Medicare and your financial plan. And for those of you who know us, you have both of us here today, myself, Tammy McGilsky, and Brian Bedford, and that's going to be more fun, I think.
It's going to go one way or another. Real quick, it's going to go one way or another.
It's kind of fun doing it this way because if you think about it, I started, when you started working with me 20 years ago, we were always on appointments together.
Yeah, it's been a while.
And there was a lot of banter.
No.
Back and forth. So
she's crazy.
We're going to have a little bit of banter today. And we're going to talk about Medicare and retirement. When I was thinking about putting together this session and how I wanted to start it, I really want to talk about why we decided to add Medicare planning to our practice.
You know, Medicare is one of those things that we've been having people question us about forever. Since I started 20 years ago, help me sign up for Medicare. There's so many different options. Which one's right for me? My answer has always been, I don't know. I don't want to know. That's a lot.
Well, because think about it. When were we ever taught about health insurance? If you think about it, most people basically, you're on your parents' health insurance, right?
Right.
And then you go to work and hopefully you get health insurance there.
Group plan.
And then after that, you turn 65 and all of a sudden you're supposed to understand how health insurance really works, which, we've had to educate ourselves about health insurance because
yes.
Planning for health insurance in retirement is an extremely large expense. And one that clients, a lot of times when we do budgeting for retirement,
it's constantly underestimated.
Constantly underestimated. And when we change the numbers on their budget to what we think they're going to need for retirement, they're like, you're overinflated. We're not going to need that. And I hope not. But I think you're discounting it for things that you're not paying attention to. And when we think about that, the first place I think about is Part B.
Right.
Because
Part A is covered.
Part A is covered. Part A is free. Well, we pay for it while we're working.
Absolutely. And if you're over the age of 65 and able to collect Social Security, you are eligible for Medicare Part A.
But Part B is you're going to pay for that. Normally, people don't pay attention because they pay for it out of their Social Security. But it's funny because when you talk to clients about their Social Security, you say, can I see your Social Security estimate? And they show it to you and they're like, I'm going to get $2,500 or $2,000 a month. And they kind of think they get to spend that money.
Well, then we have to say less.
Less.
We say less on Medicare payment, less income taxes. Well, Social Security is not going to be taxed. But yes, it is.
Yes, it is. They may not take it from you automatically like your paycheck, but when you do your taxes at the end of the year, you're going to owe taxes on.
It's likely 85% of it.
Most people are 85%
right.
of it. But the Medicare premium is something, again, they don't pay attention to. And in 2020, what's the Medicare premium?
That is $144.60 a month, I think.
Minimum, $144.60.
Yeah, starts at
$144.60 per person.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's $288 a month that you thought you were getting, that you're not getting.
Right.
And then on top of that, as Dave was talking about, that just covers A and B. Then you have to pay for Part D.
Part D in a gap plan.
So in a gap plan, you can pay for Part D. And what's the minimum on Part D?
$12.60 a month, something like that. Hold on, it's right here. Average is $32.74 a month.
$32.74 a month, okay.
Average is $32.74.
And that also is dependent upon your other income. So the government says, well, that's where you start, but depending upon what other income you have, we may charge you more.
Yep.
And then on top of that, then you have to pay for your supplement, whether it be your Medigap or your Medicare.
Right.
And that's without any co-pays, any
vision,
co-insurance, vision, dental. So healthcare in retirement is actually one of the largest expenses in retirement.
It's even more for people who make money.
It's even more for people that have saved. So we'll call that the saver's penalty. You've saved.
You did a great job planning for retirement. Your penalty is
you get to pay more for your Medicare.
Yay.
So that's kind of what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about IRMAA. And I hate these things the government does, but tell everybody what IRMAA stands for.
Income Related Monthly Adjustment Amount.
In Tammy's language, that means if you make money, you will pay more for a benefit that everybody pays less for.
So if there's anybody on watching that has the name IRMAA, I'm sorry, but this IRMAA's me.
I don't know if we have that many IRMAAs watching.
I don't know if any IRMAA's watching, but just saying, if it gets shared and then IRMAA gets there, I like you, I don't like her.
Yeah. So what IRMA does is IRMA says, depending upon what your income is, 2 years before you apply for Medicare, so it goes back 2 years. So in 2020, they look at your income in 2018.
Right, so 2 years. So if you are turning 65 in 2020, they're going to look back at your 2018 return. If you were working in 2018, they're going to look at that tax return.
And we're going to talk about how to try to get out of that. And then again, it's not a one-time look. Every year, they look at your return 2 years prior to see what they feel you should be paying for Medicare Part B.
Yeah.
So if you're single, and I think this is kind of an important part, if you're single and your income is above $87,000, then you're going to pay more for Medicare Part B than the person who makes less than $87,000.
Yep.
And again, they're using all your income. They're using your Social Security, they're using your dividends, they're using your interest, they're using your capital gains. So when people think of income, a lot of times people say, well, I'm living on this.
$5,000 a month.
Yeah. And I love that because I'll be like, oh, what's your income for the year? And they're like, oh, we made 60. And then I look at their tax return and it's like they made 94.
Right.
Yeah. And I think to myself, they're like, well, that's not mine. I didn't get that. It doesn't matter if you got it. The government wants taxes on it, right?
Right. And when the government wants taxes, it's the IRS that shares this information with Medicare. And if you're over that 87,000, the IRS just automatically forwards your return on a Medicare for them to make the IRMA adjustment.
Right. And if you're married, it starts at what number?
174. So
Medicare starts, I think we said, at 142. And how high can we pay for Medicare premium?
$491.60 a month.
Per person.
Per person, plus an additional $76.40 per month on top of whatever Part D plan that you subscribe to. So if you subscribe to a Part D plan at regular price is $34, you're going to add the $76.40 on top of that to be at the 110.
And
per month.
So you already spent $1,000 on Part B. So and people say, well, how do well, I'm not going to make that much in retirement. But again, you can't control your capital gains, right? Unless you maybe invest differently.
Right.
What about minimum distributions? People were told years ago, you should defer taking your IRA until you have to, right?
How many conversations have we had around this with different people over the years? Since birth, we are taught that's your IRA, that's your retirement money. Don't spend it until you have to. It seems like you're born and they tell you, stamp on your head, don't spend your IRA.
Right.
And to help people understand the impact or the consequences of that when it comes to things like IRMA, when it comes to just basic income tax,
right?
It can be a mistake.
Yeah, sometimes you need to not allow that IRA, that 401k to continue to grow. You should be spending at lower income limits. So therefore, you can wind up not having to pay taxes on such a large amount of money in addition to the IRMA surcharge.
Right.
And even now they changed, think about the Secure Act changed when you have to take RMD to age 72.
Right, so we're deferring it longer, we're making it bigger, so that IRMA impact is going to have more time to compound and really hit you when your RMDs start.
And if you think that the government doesn't know this.
Well, that's why they do it.
Yeah. I think
Medicare is going to go broke, so they've got to find ways to get money in there somehow.
As a matter of fact, I actually think that they're going to work on bringing these limits so that way they affect people sooner.
Yeah, the limitations are going to tear down, I would think.
Yeah, and so IRMA is an extremely important part because again, these are expenses. We just talked about up to $1,000. So at the minimum level, you're still talking maybe $500 a month or $400 a month, and because you have to talk about all the supplements that.
Well, yeah, that $1,000 we didn't include a supplement.
Right.
We can touch it.
So you need $400 or $500 a month, or up to at least $1,000 or $1,500 a month for just your health insurance and retirement, and that's not even going to cover if you need long-term care planning.
Right.
So how does this happen? And it really, if you think about it, it happens because people sell their home.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you could sell your home, and especially if you bought your home 20, 30 years ago. Like I just had a client who sold their home, and I said, "What'd you pay for it?" And they said, $40,000. What'd you sell it for? $380,000. I'm like, They said, yeah, but we get 250,000 because in their situation, she got 250,000 free, you know,
Capital gains.
She lived there for 2.5 years. I said, yeah, that's fine, but it's still money that's on your return. You know what I mean? You're still gonna,
even if that amount is exempt, it's still gonna affect your IRMA.
right, you still have to, you know, you're gonna have to show it.
Right.
So therefore, it's important to understand, like, you've got to look at all the capital gains, the selling of a home and so forth to see. If
Well, even think about mutual funds, right?
Mhm.
None of us can control when a mutual fund is going to throw out a capital gain
I
distribution,
hate that thing.
right? It's how many times a year do we have the conversation? Well, it's usually in December, we have the conversation, and April. We have the conversation about how mutual funds pay capital gains, not our mutual fund holders pay capital gains, not the funds themselves.
Where you could actually lose money.
Right, we can lose money in a mutual fund at the same time pay a capital gain, because if that mutual fund bought, let's just use Apple, right? If the mutual fund bought Apple at $60 a share, now Apple's at $390 a share, and it starts to slide back to $380. But that shareholder, or $280, but that shareholder didn't buy in until it was in the 300s. They've got a loss. So they've actually lost money in that fund. The fund says, you know what, I'm done with Apple, sells Apple, and the fund's got a capital gain. So now we've got a fund claiming a capital gain, impacting your tax return, while at the same time, you've lost money. Isn't that fun?
And then IRMA, and then.
So that capital gain goes on your return, so it could impact your IRMA.
So you really have to think about how you keep your investments, especially with after-tax monies, and how that's going to affect IRMA. You've got to look at how you're going to distribute your IRA money. Should you be doing Roth conversions because your RMDs are just going to knock you into IRMA for the rest of your life?
Yep.
Okay. And then you also have to think about how, if something were to happen to you, your income may not go down by 50%, but your spouse is going to be.
Well, those tiers go very different, right? So what we've talked about the IRMA limit and income limitation at 174,000
for a married couple.
For a married couple, it's only 87,000 if you're single, and most spouses inherit
100% of the
100% of the IRA.
Yeah.
So the RMD is likely, between RMD and Social Security, you're likely to be right there.
You know, you got to think about that, because maybe when people talked about maybe you should look at Roth conversions, maybe one, you should be doing it before IRMA is going to affect you.
Right.
Or two, maybe you should do a Roth conversion upon death to make sure that your spouse isn't winding up paying so much more for something.
Right. If there's life insurance proceeds or something there, you
right,
can use that to pay
life
some
insurance
of that
to do
tax.
that. Yeah, that would be actually, that's a good planning idea. We should talk about that. But anyway.
Do a whole presentation on that one.
I regress.
And here's where we enter.
All of a sudden I had like a light bulb go over my head going.
Yeah, I saw it.
That was a good, yeah, I know.
It's been a little while.
That wasn't nice.
No, but it was there.
Okay. Anyway.
Throw the softball out, so we're gonna hit them.
Yes, I know. So anyway, so I think that it's important that people are aware of that and think about the planning. And when I talk to people about what we do, okay, and how we help people, it's really not just the investing, because honestly, the market's going to go up, it's going to go down, it's going to go sideways. And if I could control it, I wouldn't be working.
Wouldn't have to.
So all we try to do when we do investments is we try to mitigate risk.
Exactly. Mitigate the risk, balance the asset allocation, and try to turn with the tide.
Yes. And try to understand what's going on in the world, and that whole thing of set it and forget it. We don't believe in that.
Can't do it anymore.
So done. We believe in managing risk, managing the portfolio, active management.
Active management, right.
But that's only such a small part of what we do.
Well, it's kind of like the broker part of what we do, right?
Yeah.
So that's where we're acting as brokers. But it's the planning piece that I think separates us, and our clients tell us it separates us from every other broker out there. And those are the conversations we have, whether it's about IRMA planning. I had a conversation this week with a client who their daughter wants to buy her first home, and a modest home, starting out in life, she's doing good. And he says, I don't want her to pay PMI. And I had a conversation with him. I said, how did you learn about PMI? He's like, well, I said, sit back and think about it and tell me how you learned about PMI. It's like, I don't know. Did you pay PMI? He's like, well, yeah, it's, you know, if you don't put out down 20%, you got to pay PMI. How did you learn that? Well, I had to pay it. Did you have to pay it on your current home or maybe your first home? Well, I didn't do it on this house. I did it on my first house. That was a great learning experience, was it? Yeah. Why do you want to take that away from your daughter? Do you want her to make that mistake on a bigger house, or do you want her to make that mistake on the first house? Or do you want her to save for that first house? Those are the kind of conversations as planners that we have, they have no consequence on his portfolio. They have no consequence on, but it helps him teach his next generation financial plan.
Yeah, and I think that's extremely important, making sure that we're educating, because so much of what we do, no one ever learned. No one, the word,
There's not a class in school still.
Even the word IRMA. Like, how many people have ever heard the word IRMA?
Mm-hmm.
I bet you, of the people listening and the people that watch us afterwards, maybe 1 in 50 have heard the word IRMA.
I was going to say 1%, so
you know what I'm saying?
You gave him more credit than me.
So, and they don't even realize, so like the client, I had a client that basically was working, he was turning 65 years old, he was stopping to work. And when he was working, he was making a couple $100,000 a year. Mm-hmm. And he was single. So for the women out there, yes, he's still singing.
I know who you're talking about.
Okay, hopefully he's not watching.
I'm not going to say his name.
If he's watching, he's thanking me. Anyway, so.
Paid advertisement.
Anyway, so, but when he was applying for Medicare, mm-hmm. IRMA was going to affect him because, again, he's single, over 78,000 and so forth. And I said to him, do you know that we can file a form with Medicare to do an appeal because you have a change of life status?
Yep.
And we're going to argue that you shouldn't be based on your working income. You have now left your job and you should not have that held against you. And he's like, how come Social Security didn't tell me that? And I'm like, are you that surprised? Like,
that's not what they're going to do.
No. So let's talk about the appeal process with IRMA. And remember, they're looking back 2 years right. every time. So what are some of the reasons we can file an appeal?
Death of a spouse, divorce, marriage, even if you don't retire, but you're working less hours, retirement, unemployment of any type, loss of income from another source. So let's say you had rental incomes coming into all this pandemic, mm-hmm. and you're not receiving rental incomes anymore, but you've been paying an IRMA penalty for the last few years. If you're not going to have the same rental incomes this year and that's going to take you down, file your appeal. Or loss or reduction in pension benefits. And, you know, most pensions are protected by the Pension Protection Guarantee Corporation. However, here in Rochester, we know very well that the spousal income benefit, the SIB piece of Eastman Codex, was not.
Right.
And we had a number of widows or widowers that had lost that SIB benefit. So that's another example of that comes off the tax return, but you've still got, they're still looking back 2 years. That's an appealable consequence or situation.
An appeal doesn't mean that you're going to 100% be granted.
No.
I mean, as a matter of fact, the one that we did do, the appeal on the person I'm thinking of, the first time we did the appeal, it was denied. And
but what did you say? What do we say about Social Security disability?
Yeah, it's automatically stamped. Denial.
Nope. Try again, please.
If you want to do it more than once, then we'll look at you.
Yeah. If you take the time to go through twice, we'll consider your application.
Yeah, that's our stance on Social Security disability. So the appeal process actually really did work the second time, yep. because we got them to look at his income that he was going to have in retirement versus, and he was going to stay under that limit. Mm-hmm. So that was a benefit to him. Mm-hmm. And, you know, making sure that if you can find a way to stay under the limit, maybe that means drawing from your Roth IRA. I know people think that's crazy, but sometimes that may be a good yeah. thing. If
you're at $172,000 of income and you only need a couple $1,000s more, why wouldn't you?
Right. And then also making sure that you're spending down those IRAs early enough. And, you know, it's funny, people think they don't want to spend it down because they're like, well, my marginal rate, I always ask people, what's your tax rate? And everyone always says to me, 28%.
The top bracket, right. The top piece of their marginal rate is what they tell you. That is not your effective tax rate.
No, I think because they don't realize that we have like a graded scale. Mm-hmm. So like so much get charged at 10%, so much at 15, so much right. at 18, so much. So they look at their last dollar and they say, well, I paid, you know, $100 at 28%. Well, that's only your marginal rate. Your effective rate is what you actually
pay in total tax. Divided by your AGI.
Yeah.
So it's very easy to calculate. On about 3/4 of the way down, page 2 of your tax return says total tax. That's the total amount of tax you've paid.
To the federal government.
To the federal government. Then you go to the bottom of the front page, adjusted gross income. Divide one by the other, that's your effective tax rate.
And that's what it means. Effective tax rate means what percentage of your money did you have to pay in taxes based on your income? It's a very simple calculation.
And
so
if you're considering a Roth conversion,
we have to look at effective.
You have to look at effective. You have to.
So for most people that we talk to, their effective rates are like 15%, 17%. Right. And the truth is that if you could pay, the odds of our tax rates are actually one of the lowest in history.
Yep.
So the odds of our tax rates going forward to remain that low, especially after all this money we've spent.
Our government has had no choice but to pump trillions of dollars.
Yeah, we don't talk about billions anymore. Now we're in trillions.
Skip the billions.
New TV show.
And, and here we go.
Can't help it.
In order to recoup some, and we'll never recoup all because we run a deficit, but in order to recoup some, we have no choice but to see taxes go up in the not too distant future.
And so if you think about that, right, and you think about the fact that they're going to need that money, so therefore eventually you're going to pay taxes. Sometimes it makes sense, even though people hate it, to pay taxes now.
A little bit more in taxes now, so you don't have to pay such a big one later.
Right.
And right now is the perfect example of that. And you know, we look at these consequences and say, you know, I'm going to pay an extra $30,000 in tax if I convert that huge amount into a Roth. But what happens if you don't?
Right.
How do you figure that out? We bought some software this year.
Yeah.
It's a Holistiplan, right?
Holistiplan.
So you did a case, so I'm gonna let you talk about Holistiplan.
Well, Holistiplan is a pretty interesting piece of software. And what it does is it actually, you actually put the digitized version of someone's tax return in there. And it basically analyzes the tax return. And people think that their accountants do this. Their accountants do not do this. Their accountants put the information into the tax return.
Right,
but,
and find out how much tax they owe.
And find out how much, it's really more of a historical kind of thing.
Right.
But what Holistiplan does is it looks and says, you know, this is what you're paying in, this is how close you are to the Medicare surtax. You may want to look at adjusting some of your investments. This is what you paid in capital gains. If you
potential areas for improvement or something. They
yes.
Call, right? Yeah.
This is where, you know, if you did this much of a Roth, we can actually do samples now. So what I did with the client is I basically said, why don't we look, because this year, these individuals that were taking required minimum distributions had the ability to put their money back into their retirement plan and not have to take the RMD. So we were talking about them putting the money back into it, but after we put it back into it, then converting it. So now we're going to turn it from, we're going to pay the taxes as if we would have with the RMD, but now we're going to put it into the Roth IRA and let the money grow tax-free. And then we were going to take money from their after-tax account that had already been taxed and let them live off of that this year. So by doing that, we said, well, maybe we should do more than the RMD because that would allow us to, again, stay under IRMA, because that was our objective. In addition to that, pay taxes at the same exact rate. She didn't even have to go up a bracket. Right. And we, for her, got an additional $35,000 out that we could convert. And that was going to be a big advantage because now she has a much bigger number growing tax-free for life. Right.
And a smaller number growing tax-deferred that's going to impact her RMDs in the future.
Yeah. And so this Holistiplan is pretty amazing. And, you know, I really think that, you know, I had a different conversation with a client this week, and the client said that their child, who's a grown child, said, you know, I don't really know why you pay someone to do investments. Like, we do our investments on our own. And that's because, and I said to her, you know, that's because she doesn't really understand what we do. You know, we don't just do your investments because, again, understanding asset allocation, understanding that is something, if it interests you, you could teach yourself.
And be good at it.
And be good at it. Yeah. But the difference is understanding all the planning that's necessary to create a successful retirement plan.
Right, comprehensive.
Comprehensive, looking at the tax planning, looking at the estate planning,
the
Medicare planning, and making sure all those pieces go together. That is something that, honestly, you couldn't teach yourself. It's taken me 30,
I was just going to say, we take classes still every single year. Each of us take more and more
and
classes.
We learn every time we go somewhere.
Yeah.
So, you have to entrench yourself in this type of stuff, and you have to really want to understand it and the cost of long-term care in your plan.
Mhm.
So when I think about retirement planning, I think about it as a puzzle. And the reason it was important to add Medicare was because Medicare was such an important part of the plan, because it wasn't $20 a month.
No, it can be thousands.
It can be $1,000 or $1,500 a month between Medicare and the supplements.
Right.
And people don't realize that they can be minimizing that. And we go back to the concept of, it's not what you earn, it's what you keep, right? It's not
Always.
how much money your investments generate. Tell me how much money have you actually got to keep?
Right.
Because what you keep is what you spend. And
if you don't have to pay as high of a premium, if you don't have to pay as much in taxes, why should you? Why would you?
right,
If you can do effective planning that doesn't change the way you live,
right,
has no impact on your everyday life, but has a huge impact on whether you're in IRMA or whether you're paying, a higher effective tax rate. Those are things that good planning can help.
and that's the important part of Medicare, because health insurance is such a big part of someone's retirement expense. Making sure they have the right Medicare supplement is a big deal. I mean,
Well, and where Medicare premium is going to go, right? The IRMA penalty is not going to get better.
no,
It's going to get worse because Medicare is going broke.
I think they have a problem like in the next 2.5 or 3 years.
Yes,
it's
we're going to
real-
see adjustments to this in
after-
short order.
I think after the election.
Right. Nobody wants to talk about anything now.
No, it's not popular.
No.
So I think that that's something that we really do need to pay attention to, paying attention to when to take the RMDs, making sure that, especially now, that you're really looking, even if you can live off your cash, right?
Mhm.
Maybe that's not the best
Right.
idea.
Should you? Just
Should
because you can doesn't mean you should.
And that's really why sitting down with a financial advisor to look at the whole picture, like that client this week who called us up and said, I want you to think about investing this money for us. And
Mhm.
we said, we can't unless we look at your whole picture.
Right.
Because,
Because it has consequences.
yeah, and at the end of the day, when we don't tell them those consequences, they're going to be like, it's our fault.
It's on you. Right.
And the fact that we're fiduciaries and under the special new best interest rule, which, is a new
It's a
federal
whole
guideline.
other layer of regulation.
Yeah, I think that really most advisors, good advisors, should really not just do investments for clients.
Well, you just said two different things, right? So most advisors, I have a hard time even with the word advisor because it's so linked to broker. There's two different people out there. There's brokers and there's planners. If you're just a broker, you're not going to be that fiduciary. You're not going to be held to that same fiduciary standard because you are simply focusing on brokerage.
Well, that's why that new thing came out now, which basically the client has to see that if they're working in a commission-based environment
Right.
versus an advisory-based environment. I'm not sure how many clients really understood what the government was going to do, and I'm not even sure that a lot of people that do what we do differentiate themselves.
Right.
But I think it's extremely important that we make sure, and that's really why we started this education process. We've done it for years, whether it was in public or in companies
Right.
teaching.
Face to face.
Face to face.
Not over the computer.
Not over, yeah, but this is a new normal.
We miss you.
We do. But the thing is that it's extremely important, and that's why this whole thing of this legacy learning, your money in retirement, this whole concept that we're trying to produce, to really educate people about their money and different things they need to know. That's why this whole YouTube channel is getting created.
Right.
Because
we have spent our entire careers educating, whether it be standing in front of the room at Biaggi's 15 years ago,
or in front of the people at 9 Mile.
or in front of the people at 9 Mile, in front of the people at Hadley.
Right.
We have always been teaching. And through teaching, we have developed some wonderful client relationships,
Yes.
but it's always through teaching.
But we've also taught a lot of people that have not become clients. And that's okay.
And right. Everyone needs to learn.
Yeah. And I think one of the best things that as we continue, and I'm looking for more and more topics that we're going to educate people on, and we're going to talk about the next set of topics that we're going to talk about. But as we continue, I think it's extremely important. The best thing that our clients could do is share this with people that they know. Even if it's people that you don't talk about money with, share the video so they can learn about the word IRMA.
Right.
If they learn nothing, they learn that there is a possibility they could be paying more for Medicare
than they have to.
And you know what? If you helped one person, if everybody taught one person, everybody would get a lot smarter.
Yeah.
And then we've done.
And who's not going to be appreciative of receiving that email, right? So if John Q. Smith sends his buddy Jimmy an email that says, hey, I just watched this presentation, here's a link. There's no come see us. There's no show us your financials. No. There's nothing. It's a conversation about Medicare planning that could help him save or her save hundreds of dollars a month in potential IRMA penalties.
And the thing is that if they decide they want to sit down with us, they don't have to go through you. They can look us up and they can talk to us through that. So I think that's a great thing. But, you know, I wanted to make sure we talk about that because that is something that is really passionate about.
It's the next phase of what we're doing.
Yeah, it's really, I really think it's the next phase of good advice.
Agreed. Which
I think is important. But you know, Medicare planning does lead you into the next topic because
it doesn't cover everything.
It doesn't cover everything.
And it can't. And if it did, it'd be broke long before now.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? So Medicare doesn't cover when you stop showing market improvement, right? So it doesn't cover long-term illness.
No. And
no one knows it better than you.
No, I've lived that one. So, you know, I used to say, and I still believe it, that God basically put my parents' illness in my life to basically teach me about long-term care planning. So therefore I can make sure that people out there understand how it really does affect people and how you can actually spend down everything you possibly have and you're still sick, you know? Yeah. So
you weren't fortunate enough to leave.
No, right. So I think understanding where Medicare stops and where long-term care planning comes in.
And long-term care planning, when we hear the words long-term care, many people immediately think insurance. It's not just insurance, it's a plan.
I think people think nursing.
That too, right?
And really that's not even the case either.
100%, because with the right plan, you stay in your home as long as possible.
Which is what you want. Right?
And receive the care that you select. With the right plan, you can do these things.
So I think what we're going to do next time, which I think, when's our next presentation, next class?
August 11th, 18th, and 25th. We've got 3 sessions on long-term care planning because long-term care planning is complex.
Yes, and we're going to talk about planning because years ago, we used to do a presentation, we used to talk about different risks in life, and I'll never forget this because it really hit me that we talked about the risk in the presentation of needing homeowners insurance, and the need was 1 in 1,200 that your house would burn down and you would have to implement your homeowners insurance. And I asked the group always, how many people in this room, even if your house is paid off and you don't have to carry homeowners insurance, would stop paying for homeowners insurance? And nobody.
0, goose egg, every time.
Would raise their hand, right?
Right.
But yet the odds of needing care, some sort of custodial care.
It's 2 out of 5.
2 out of 5 of us. So if we're in a room of 5 people, having dinner with 5 people, 2 people in the group are going to need this type of care. And this care, the cost of this grows even faster than medical.
Yep, sure does.
So if we think about this, I think this is something we need to talk about. How do we plan for this in retirement? Because between the medical expenses in retirement and the care for maybe possibly some sort of custodial care in retirement, can eat away retirement assets.
Well, we've seen it, right? We've seen it destroy people's personal finance. I mean, we've seen it wipe people out hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah, and it's really important that you pay attention. So at the next session, next couple of sessions, we're going to talk about what long-term care is.
Right, we'll intro it in the next time and we'll really start to talk about some of the risks involved. And there are lots of different solutions. So we're going to start talking about the different solutions. And maybe we'll end up with an attorney in here to have some conversation with us. I think I spoke with him last night, so I think he's going to be on board with that.
Okay, so for those of you who were, if you learned anything today, I hope you learned that making sure that your financial plan is set up for your retirement income and making sure, and it will affect your Medicare. So what you choose in Medicare is important. So we're big believers, as we believe that you should sit down with us and talk about your financial plans, or sit down with your own advisors, or someone who is skilled in
someone who's educated
in retirement planning. We also think it's important that you don't just guess on your Medicare.
No.
And that we actually look at your Medicare. And if you have other advisors, if they're not looking at your Medicare, maybe they're not doing the full job. So I hope all of you have enjoyed today's presentation.
Give us a like, please give us a share.
And if you could share what we're doing, we're still working on the name. We're calling it Legacy Learning, Your Money in Retirement. Any ideas there?
Yeah, if you've got good names,
let us know.
Let us know.
But we appreciate your time, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Stay safe, stay healthy, and talk to you soon.
All right. Bye, guys.